And our next session is going to be by Rene Modery. Rene is currently in Singapore, I think. He has been an Office MVP for a long time now. He has more than 10 years of experience in IT, especially with Office 365 and Microsoft SharePoint. So I'm going to hand you to Rene and his best practices for running effective meetings in Microsoft Teams.
Great, thank you, Tony, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Just gonna take over now. Just give me 1 second so that you can see my screen. Okay, good. So I'm gonna talk about how you can actually run some effective meetings in Microsoft Teams. Ideally, you would already know all that. Maybe you know the majority of it, but it's good again to have it all in one place, look at all the different practices that should be considered when you run meetings actually in Teams or generally. So my name is Rene Modery. I'm basically, as Tony said, an Office Apps and Services MVP for quite some time, since 2012. I live in Singapore, originally from Germany, but have been here in Singapore for quite a long time as well. I work as an Office 365 project manager covering the region Asia Pacific here. I work for Group M, which is a very large company, media investment company. And we've got around, I think, more than 40,000 Office 365 licenses in our current tenant. So what we actually see is part of what Tony has been showing a few minutes ago, that there's this big growth when it comes to Teams this year. So some statistics directly from our tenant. So we see, for example, that the amount of meetings that have been organized in April compared to January has jumped by 20 times. So really a lot more online meetings within Microsoft Teams, and that includes all kinds of different meetings, whether it's just smaller ones or bigger ones. We also see 40 times as many group calls, so a lot of different calls than where we've got multiple participants. That may be also meetings that have not been scheduled, but those are, you could say, really meetings that are a bit more spontaneous. Maybe because some people quickly get together to discuss something urgently or so. That's the idea for the group calls. And we also see 50 times as many one-to-one calls, so really one person calling another person. And that can easily be explained actually by the working from home status that we see, not just here in Asia Pacific where I'm working, but actually globally with a lot of countries now in lockdown or asking people to work from home. For example, in Asia Pacific here at some point, we had more or less all of our countries working from home to a certain degree. Some of them maybe were working shifts. So one half of the company was working online, the other half was working in the office. Sometimes they shifted also to nearly everyone or everyone has to work from home. Right now in Singapore, we have that, for example, that all our staff is working from home. So really, that's when you want to reach out maybe to a colleague to discuss something. That's where you see those one-to-one calls, which in a way is also a smaller meeting. It may not be a lot of participants if there are only two, but still you're meeting here. Another thing I quickly want to show you or quickly mention is also something that just came out basically yesterday. So Microsoft had its annual call where they provided some updates, the quarterly call where they provided some updates on financial numbers, etc. And the Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella then also said that they're seeing, or within Teams, they saw on one single day more than 200 million meeting participants. So you see, that's a really huge number. And while we don't see how many, for example, there were in January this year or sometime last year, it's still something really big. And you can imagine there's a lot happening here in the Microsoft ecospace. And also basically those meeting participants generated 4.1 billion meeting minutes. So we see, yes, Teams is really huge. A lot of people are jumping into it, using it. But that also means a lot of people who may be used to basically working in meeting rooms, meeting in meeting rooms, or working only from the office, suddenly have to use this new technology here for them. But it may be something that they used from time to time to join a meeting or call somebody. Suddenly it's become a lot more important to actually hold your meetings from home, basically, for a lot of people. And that's why I think it's very important, again, to visit again what are meetings generally, but also how do we hold them effectively. So Teams meetings generally can consist of a different, let's call it properties or dimensions. So you may have your one-to-one calls that I mentioned or your group calls. So there's a different number of participants. Some meetings are spontaneous, where you're just quickly calling your boss, for example, to ask something, or you get a few people discussing in a chat and you decide, no, it's not effective to just chat the whole time. Let's just have a quick 5-minute mini call, for example, to discuss what has been discussed in the chat directly via video and audio. They can be scheduled or recurring, they can be in a channel, they can be outside of a channel. There are even live events. Generally, there's a whole, again, basically a whole range of different possibilities, but in a way, they're all meetings. Doesn't matter how many people there are or whether they've been organized or not, it's still considered to be a meeting. What consists now of an effective meeting? What generally do meetings have that make them effective? So first of all, meetings should have a clear agenda, obviously. If you have a meeting, you don't know why you're meeting, you don't know what's on the agenda, then obviously the question is why you even meet. So that's one of the key things, obviously, to work on. Make it clear what the agenda is that you're having, why you're meeting, what you're discussing, etc. A meeting should also have a goal. So you're not just meeting, working on the agenda, and you won't just, maybe the goal is to work through the agenda, but at least at the end of the meeting, you should say, yes, we know our goal for that meeting has been achieved. We managed to go through our 5 discussion points and have clear next action items, for example, for the next meeting or for the next, well, other activities. That's the other important part. And meeting should also have the right number of participants. So that's one important thing. Sometimes you might just get dragged into a meeting spontaneously. That's happening right now. That happened to me from a couple of times, because for that meeting to have to reach its goal, basically they needed to pull somebody in with the right knowledge on something that was discussed. So participants is really important. Before you create a meeting, you obviously think about who those participants are, you invite them, but sometimes that may not be enough. So within Teams, it's also easily possible while you're in a meeting to just pull in some other people. You can obviously talk to them beforehand via chat if they're available, but the idea is you're not just restricted to having the current meeting participants, but you can also ask somebody else to join, or you can actually add them directly to a call. So suddenly they will receive a call telling them, oh, somebody has invited you to join meeting XYZ as an example. So that's a bit similar, like when you're having a regular in the office meeting in a meeting room, you're thinking, hey, wait, we're not enough here. We need somebody with a certain expertise. Let's just quickly ask him to come in. So the same thing obviously applies to online meetings as well. When you think about the whole meeting lifecycle now, I already described it a little bit, is there are a few components. So first of all, you want to prepare for meetings. So that's the pre-meeting area. We need to think about why do you have a meeting, who should join, when is the meeting, all those kinds of things. The next thing you need to do is then obviously hold your meeting. So there are certain activities that are performed during a meeting where you also need to make sure that whatever you're doing, again, go through the agenda, meet your goals, actually happens directly in there. Once the meeting's over, it's actually not fully over, because obviously, as discussed, there may be some action items. Maybe you need to inform somebody else about what happened in the meeting, etc. So there may be meeting reviews following. Very often people actually scribble something on a whiteboard that's in a meeting room, whether that's paper-based or whiteboard on a wall, doesn't matter. So people were actually taking down notes, etc. That content that was generated in the meeting is still relevant, obviously, after the meeting. And that's also where Teams can provide you with some possibilities and opportunities, which we'll also see in a few minutes. So even when the meeting's over, it's not fully over. You can still actually work with some of the knowledge, experience, and content and notes that have been discussed, exchanged, and generated inside the meeting. So let's talk now about, again, how do you now structure a meeting? What do you have to do to make it a bit more effective? So when you set up a meeting, there are 2 things that can happen. First of all, you just say, oh, I'm going to create a meeting. I had some people, done. So on the right side, you see meeting with me. What is this meeting about? If it's just says meeting with Rene Modery, yeah, that might be not really interesting. Obviously, you want to know why should somebody meet here with me. So obviously a title is very important, and title is really the general topic of that meeting. And very often that gets sometimes a bit ignored, or just like that, let's meet as a title or so, but then again, it becomes not clear what that meeting is about. So the topic is really important. The other thing is, which is on the left side, so you see when you generate a meeting or create a new meeting within Teams, you obviously see the default screen where it asks you about some general information, nothing really new, nothing really fancy. You've got the same thing obviously in Outlook, but you can see here the very important thing is actually the bottom one that gets very often ignored, which is the type details for this new meeting. So the meeting description. Why are you meeting? So you might have a title that says sales meeting, which is at least an indicator. But again, what is the sales meeting all about? Is it to discuss some new sales strategy? Is it to discuss sales numbers that were recently, recently discovered or calculated? Is it about bringing on a new client or so? That's really the important part here. The purpose of the meeting. So every meeting needs to have a very clear purpose, which gets written down, described, and shared in the title of the meeting and the description. And while it sounds quite simple, very often I look at my calendar and think, oh, I've got a meeting and I'm not even sure what that meeting is really about. So the more detail gets put into the meeting description, the more helpful it is obviously for attendees to prepare for the meeting beforehand. So it's not only important then to explain to everyone when the meeting starts what the meeting is about, but make the purpose clear before the meeting and at the beginning of the meeting again, so that people can also prepare for it before they even join. If I know, oh, there's a sales meeting discussing the new sales strategy, I can quickly review again. The sales strategy was maybe shared with me, review it again, etc. So it allows people to come well prepared to your meeting. And while very often that gets done easily when you book a regular meeting in a meeting room, for online meetings, sometimes people do the, let's call it quick and dirty meeting, just saying, okay, let's meet, adding a few people, send out the invitation, but people will not really have a fully clear understanding of the goal of that meeting. That brings me to the next thing. So we've got different meeting roles, actually. Interesting. Okay, so we've got different meeting roles. First of all, very clearly, you've got a presenter. In online meetings, very important, usually somebody needs to present or take a presenter kind of role. I'm not talking about a technical role here that's available in Microsoft Teams, but about a general social role, let's call it that way. So the presenter is the one who is leading a good amount of the meeting, who's sharing information with others, who is leading discussions, etc. Right now, that's me here, for example. Everyone listening in right now is then obviously an attendee. There may also be a difference here, or maybe a dynamic switch between these roles. At the beginning of the call, obviously, I was just an attendee. I was listening to Tony just the same way as you. And obviously, at some point, I then was made the presenter. And once I'm done with my session, I'm an attendee again. So the idea is not that as a meeting role is fixed throughout the whole meeting, but it can be a bit more dynamic. Presenter and attendee roles are generally quite well understood. People who attend online meetings also usually understand it. If you've got very small meetings, it may be that you could say everybody becomes a presenter at some point. If you've got a meeting with 100 people, obviously that's usually not the case. That's where you might want to make sure that only specific people are allowed to actually present, whereas the majority of people are attendees. So depending on the size of your meeting, you may also want to have someone who manages that part, which brings me to the moderator role. So moderator is something that may not be quite important for a smaller meeting where we've got 5 or maybe up to 10 people. But if you're talking about, oh, let's have this town hall meeting for our 200 employees here in Teams, obviously a moderator is essential. You need to have that person. Why is that so? So the moderator facilitates the whole meeting and assures a smooth experience for everyone here. Not just the attendees so that they can see everything in detail, but also for different kinds of presenters. So as you saw, basically, there was a handover from Tony to me. There's a whole team here from Syskit working in the background, making sure that any other presenters are available. They help you answer questions while I'm presenting. They help me later, for example, send me some of those questions that reach me so that I'm really focused on my presentation here right now, and I don't have to constantly check, oh, did somebody ask something or so. They help me basically run a very clear, focused meeting and help me then with anything else around it. They also then basically check the chat regularly, as just mentioned, and inform me if there's something. So that's really important, especially if you've got a lot of people, maybe there's a lot of conversations going on, happening in your regular Teams meeting. So the moderator is really the person who may not, or generally speaking, would not even present directly. They don't talk themselves, but they actually make sure that the presenters are fully supported and can do their presentation and their activities in a very efficient and uninterrupted manner. And that brings me to the last point. Obviously, when you're in a meeting, there's always somebody joining who forgets to mute or so. And as a moderator, I think that's very important. Very often you just need to do a mute again for a specific person. So again, moderator is really supporting the whole big meeting experience. Talking about that, somebody joins, forgets to mute the microphone. Very important now. I mean, we're in a big meeting here right now. You see me hopefully in a very clear manner through the camera. You can hear me hopefully quite well. Very important for attendees and more importantly for presenters, obviously, is that your hardware should be working. So hardware is a couple of different things. First of all, your audio. Chances are that if you're working on a laptop, the laptop supports a decent audio experience, meaning you talk, your inbuilt microphone will actually record it quite well. But very often some microphones are not perfect, so the built-in quality is not the best. Sometimes better to really use external devices, and it doesn't have to be a $500 headset or so. It can be as simple as for example, what I've got here, my handphone headset, for example, that I can just simply plug into my Surface actually and just use it here as well if wanted. Same thing applies. So prepare your audio, make sure it's working properly. Also, obviously, as an attendee, so very often people try and say, oh, I can't hear anything, but it's not actually the meeting experience fault or the presenter's fault. It's really they set up the wrong audio device beforehand. Brings me also to the next item, the camera or video generally. While a lot of people join meetings and prefer to keep the camera off, obviously having a video on screen is quite important these days when you're talking to your colleagues. Tony mentioned before, you need to be connected to your colleagues and it's good to see them. I was in a call today with 12 people and basically I was the only one with a camera, and it feels a bit different compared to, for example, another call I had last week, where everyone had their camera turned on, you could see them, you basically see them face to face in a way, and that's really so much better. And lastly, the network connection. That's also one important last thing. While it may be a very simple thing to say, yeah, should be fine, one important thing is obviously when you're having your meeting, your connection should be good. It's something you think should be okay, but working from home, a lot of people realize, hey, my Wi-Fi is not the best when I actually have a quick urgent call with my boss, and the kids are playing in the living room, so I'm going to, for example, the bedroom, I close the door and suddenly my Wi-Fi signal drops a lot and things get quite bad. So it's quite important actually to make sure that where you take your calls, you've got a good internet and network connection. And one quick comment, last comment here regarding the audio and video again. So as you can see within Teams, it's important to check regularly actually your device settings when you join calls, especially when you, as me, for example, regularly plug in and plug out of your docking stations, use different speakers, use different microphones, or even got multiple cameras. It's important to actually have all of that properly prepared beforehand. Very important for presenters. The last thing you want to do is actually at the beginning of your presentation, actually start talking, nobody can hear you, camera's not working, all that obviously is something you should test beforehand and make sure that it's working, even though it worked the past 5 times, maybe 6 times. You plug in basically another device and then Teams uses, for example, a different configuration. Now, once the meeting has started, very important is actually also then again, what about those people who are not able to join the meeting for various reasons? There are still people who want to maybe provide feedback afterwards, who want to see what happened in the meeting, who want to review the meeting contents. Teams allows you to easily, quickly record basically your meeting at any point in time. So at the beginning of the meeting, somebody just says, yes, I'm going to start recording. It gets recorded. At the end of the meeting, they stop recording. And what happens is your recording gets stored in Microsoft Stream. That's Microsoft 365's streaming and video platform. What happens is then now, by default, then only the participants that were invited to the meeting or participated in the meeting can actually access that recording, but you can also share it with others then afterwards. So you can still extend its scope a bit and say, oh, we forgot to invite somebody new joined, basically, and they want to review last week's sales meeting, for example, again. It's easy to share such a recording with people. Plus, if you're trying to figure out after meeting, hey, we discussed a couple of items, there were 3 action items, I only remember 2, what was the third one? You can actually review the video again, look at what has been discussed here, but you can also leverage Microsoft Stream's intelligent capabilities. So not only does it get uploaded to Stream and you can view it there, but you can actually also see then a transcript that gets generated if the meeting is held, for example, in English. So I can see then, for example, what has been discussed when, and I can easily, for example, also search the transcript and remember, oh, we talked about a certain item, and I can just type in the keyword and try to find that point in time where it was discussed and jump directly into that point in time, basically, of the meeting and look again and listen again, basically, what was the thing that we talked about. So really important. A lot of people don't really know about it, that you can record your meetings. And it's really extremely valuable, especially if you've got, for example, weekly status updates or so, and you just want to make sure that whatever gets discussed gets captured properly. Which also brings me to the next thing here, actually, collaborating on content. So when you're in a meeting, it's not just people talking, obviously, and showing their face on the camera, but there's something usually that needs to be shared. It's nothing new. We've been sharing content through online conferencing for years, probably. We've done it in Link before. We've done it in Skype for Business before. You can still do it in Teams, obviously, but there's a lot more that you can do now. So while you can still share your screen, people can see you work in real time, actually, on a spreadsheet, for example, and provide some feedback. You can also actually leverage meeting notes here as part of the as part of a meeting, and basically take notes that can then be reviewed afterwards. But you can also actually leverage Microsoft Whiteboard. So everybody's in a room, in a physical meeting room. As mentioned earlier, there's a whiteboard that people can scribble on, basically share some ideas, exchange some thoughts there, draw some ideas, etc. There's a lot of sketching going on. In online meetings, that was obviously not an easy thing, but Microsoft Whiteboard allows you to do that. You can do that straight from Teams, actually. So there's a Windows client that you can use and download, but there's also a web version. And within Teams, for example, you can actually launch Whiteboard. So you can see on the left screenshot, there's the blue section called Whiteboard. Once you launch it, you get an area like the screenshot on the right, where people can actually all sketch concurrently. So it's not just one person who has a whiteboard and they can just draw something on it, but really a lot of people, everyone in the meeting can just jump in and, for example, provide some feedback here on the whiteboard. And again, that is trying to emulate the experience that you have when you've got a couple of people working in a physical meeting room, working on a whiteboard there and sketching out some ideas. Same thing here. And once the meeting ends, actually, your whiteboard content still gets stored online and you can still access it afterwards, share it afterwards, etc. So similar to what we've seen before with the with Microsoft Stream and the recording. Again, you can easily then take that previously recorded whiteboard here, for example, and share it with others then again. So the idea is then, a meeting is not over when it's over, but people can still, for example, experience and see some of that content very easily after the meeting. Plus, any ideas that you put in here, obviously, you can then take it out, put it into a for example, a proper visual diagram, or share it in a PowerPoint presentation, share it via email, etc. There's a lot more that can be done here then as well when you use Whiteboard. Again, meetings don't just have to be people talking or so, but really you can actually collaborate here directly together. And that's basically what I think marks or makes meetings quite efficient when you compare it, for example, to the older Skype for Business meetings, where such things were not so easily possible, or maybe not possible at all. Now, I talked a whole lot about those experiences, practices from a technical point of view, but there's one important thing I want to bring up here now at the end, which is also something that Tony mentioned earlier. Current meetings actually with a lot of people working from home are not really people working from a quiet home office. A lot of people were basically thrown into this new situation where, oh, it's not just one person working from home, but suddenly, oh, you've got your kids around you, maybe on the dining room table. That's what happens for me, for example, in the mornings. I've got my daughter on my left, my son on the right. They're both busy with some homework, for example. And while I try to have also my meetings not in the morning, but rather schedule them in the afternoon when the kids are busy with other things, then I don't need to support them. It's just a new meeting scenario that it's not always possible to have undisturbed meetings. People are not always working in quiet home offices, in quiet rooms or so, but very often basically life just continues around them. The kids make noise, the dog barks, the doorbell rings because you've got a grocery delivery. Things just keep happening, obviously, and it becomes difficult to manage it all during these times. And the animation that you see here is, I think, 3 years old now. So that was during a live BBC interview where the interviewer's daughter came happily walking into the room. Shortly afterwards, the small son came running in and the mother came crawling in. Basically, 3 years ago, it was quite amusing. Nowadays, I think it's close to being the norm that suddenly something like that happens. For example, I was on a call there with my regional IT colleagues, and obviously the moment I started presenting, my son came and needed some urgent help, so I had to take a short 2-minute break. Somebody else continued presenting while I helped my son. Or the other thing is, my boss lives in London, I live in Singapore. Our one-to-one calls are, our one-to-one meetings are always team calls. While previously that was done in, let's say, a quiet meeting room where I just basically sat in a, let's call it a phone booth, for example. It also meant that nowadays I'm sitting at home with the kids, and while it's afternoon for me, once she actually starts working, the kids might still be around, her son is around, so we don't really have those quiet one-to-one calls anymore, but rather it's me, her, and at least one, maybe more kids somewhere around us. But we've accepted it, we understand it. That's not really the expectation that, oh, the meeting is perfectly working well, it's perfectly smooth, as I mentioned earlier, but such interruptions are possible. And I'm actually quite surprised that nobody interrupted me right now, actually, during the past 30 minutes. Very happy about that. But yeah, so the idea is then, if you're trying to have a perfect, efficient meeting right now, accept that efficiency does not mean it's completely uninterrupted. You can prepare for it. You can have for example, some lights that show, for example, a red indicator if you're on a call, and a green indicator if you're available or so, and your kids might respond to that and understand that, but not everyone has that. Not everyone has the possibility to sit in a quiet corner. So it's really also important to understand, we should show understanding and empathy basically towards others. All right, so we're also reaching the end of my slot time. So I want to thank you all for listening to me during the past 30 minutes. I hope that there was something that you found valuable, something that you found helpful. And I'm open for any questions right now, if there's anything you want to know or anything I should delve in any further.
Thank you, Rene. This is Tony, and we've got some interesting questions, so I'm going to start reading them for you, and you can then try to provide some answers. There are some really interesting ones. I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say. So let's start with the first one. We don't see the names of all the people. Some of people are anonymous. So we have a question: what is the best way to share recording outside of the organization? Is it OneDrive, SharePoint, YouTube?
That's a very good point. So that's one limitation in Microsoft Stream right now. You can only share it with internals within Stream. If you want to share now your recording with someone external, because maybe there were external participants or somebody else on the outside wall needs to see that recording, you need to download that video actually from Stream and then put it in another platform. Whether that's now SharePoint or OneDrive or YouTube or any other platform, that also depends then on whom do you want to share it with. You want YouTube, obviously you want to share it with the whole wide world. That would be an example where YouTube obviously would be a better choice. You want to share it only with specific people, then obviously SharePoint or OneDrive, both are possible. OneDrive might make it easier if you personally download it and put in your own OneDrive and you want to share it with only one person. But if you basically want to allow multiple people to share it with other multiple people outside in an easy manner, so for example, let's say this recording that happens here right now, if you want to allow multiple people to share that easily with the outside world, then yes, maybe a SharePoint site would be that better. But again, you would have to download it from Stream and then put it into an appropriate platform.
Thank you. I have another interesting question regarding recordings. Steve asks, he says that his company has decided that recording meetings is a security risk and has disabled that feature. Can you know of any security risks that are related to recording meetings? Is that a big issue?
It's a good point. So I think that mostly the big concerns here around, hey, if we have a meeting that has very confidential information that gets recorded, and basically any meeting participant can now go in and download it and share it again, I don't know, for example, again, upload it to YouTube. That's something that people want to avoid. That's again, moving back again to, I would say, not just regarding meeting recordings, but regarding any kind of content that you have internally that could get downloaded and shared with externals or so. So there's no recommendation I have here actually. So I do not see such a risk here actually, because that can happen with a lot of other content as well, whether it's now sensitive financial information, any R&D details or so. That kind of content could also be taken from any other system actually and shared with the outside world, unless you put in very restrictive permissions and other, for example, management techniques like rights management protection, for example. But for videos, basically, yeah, recommendation is a bit harder to say otherwise. Has to be considered per company, and I understand that some companies have concerns around this because they may have more sensitive information discussed during calls, but it's also, yeah, up to the company in the end.
Okay, so we are moving to more soft questions right now. So we have a question: what is your advice how to properly teach all employees about meetings best practices?
That's a very good point. So if you look around, there are a couple resources online that you can look for. For example, Tony had that, I can't remember how many it was, 7, 8, 9 best practices for meetings, for example. So if you look for Teams meeting etiquette, for example, or meeting etiquette, you can find, for example, what is generally recommended. And how do you share that now with your employees? I think it's very important to do two things here. One, actually decide how should people behave during meetings, what should they do, what should they not do, and then also explain it to them properly. So that comes again to a bit of change management and adoption. So you might have, for example, different ways how you can approach it. A simple way would be to send around an email to everyone with a link to a presentation that explains, oh, why should you do certain things in meetings? Better, why not hold just a meeting, basically invite people or ask people to join that meeting and explain to them again, hey, we're, for example, rolling out Microsoft Teams. This is how you should actually hold your meetings. This is how you should attend meetings properly, etc. So that's all something that you can actually prepare for.
Okay, so we have another question regarding roles that you mentioned before. Somebody wants to know, what about the recorder role? Sometimes the presenter can write the meeting notes, but in a more crowded meeting, this should be a separate person, or this is a task for a moderator that you introduced as a role as well.
Yeah, so that's actually important that this should be something that's planned beforehand. So before you start the meeting, it should be clear who will take on that responsibility. Very often it might be the person who organized the meeting, for example. You organize the meeting, you are responsible for recording it, for example, or you are presenting, you just make sure, oh, once you start presenting, yeah, it actually started recording. But for large meetings, again, that's really the moderator's role. The moderator, for example, announces to everyone, okay, we're starting the meeting now, I'm going to start the recording. And then the moderator basically clicks the record button and remains quiet until the end, for example, or until he basically or she announces the next presenter. But generally speaking, the main responsibility here, or the main person to do that, I think, in my opinion, would be the moderator for the majority of meetings.
Okay, so we have a comment from Joe. He just says that the GCC, the government tenants, the whiteboard feature is not available for them. So just for people that are from the government organizations to know that they might not use it right now. And I have one question for you, Rene. So can the roles of a meeting be set up when we are generating the meeting invitation, or what is the best approach here?
Yeah, so that's a good point, actually. So when you prepare for a meeting, you want to have a few people that are presenters, for example, and you want to have maybe everyone else to be just an attendee. So when you actually set up a meeting, and I'm talking just about a regular Teams meeting now, not talking about live meetings, because they're obviously a whole more trickier thing to set up, but regular Teams meeting, you actually have the option to define who is allowed to present. And you can actually then define that only you as the meeting creator are allowed to present initially, and then you can make other people presenters, or you can also specify beforehand which people that will attend the meeting are allowed to present. So that's what can be done beforehand. And it can be done quite easily when you set up a new meeting. You've got the meeting options link, for example, in Teams and also in Outlook. Once you join or once you click on that link, then you can actually manage then the different roles, or more importantly, manage the presenter role here, and then make sure that, again, only those who are allowed to present will be given the presenter role, and everyone else who joins is then an attendee.